All right, this is grade 8, chapter 6, practice review of fraction operations from your Mathlinks 8 textbook. The first 3 questions are simply your match for definitions. The first one says 3 1/4. What is that? That is a mixed number because it contains both a whole number and a fraction. 8/9 is what we call a proper fraction because it is expressing less than a whole, less than 1 or a whole. And your last one, 11/3, is what we call an improper fraction because the numerator is larger than the denominator. It expresses more than 1 or a whole. So mixed fractions and improper fractions both express values more than 1, whereas proper fractions express values less than 1. Question 4 says unscramble letters to make a word. This one here, does anyone know what the key word is? What does that mean? Reciprocal, which means the flip of a fraction. And what we mean by that is we swap the numerators and denominators. And if we say what's the reciprocal of 2/3, the reciprocal of 2/3 would be 3/2. An interesting question that you would see on your test, if I said what is the reciprocal of 2 2/3 or 1 2/3, in order to first think of its reciprocal, you need to think of it as an improper fraction. And therefore you would say the reciprocal of 1 2/3 is 3/5. Its reciprocal is 3/5. Now, an interesting thing about reciprocals, I think we mentioned it last class. What happens if you multiply a number by its reciprocal? Remember what happens? So if I say the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2, and I take those two fractions and multiply them together, because I'm multiplying the numerators and denominators which are identical, I'm going to end up with the number 1. In this case here, if I said what's 1 2/3 multiplied by 3/5, well, that would be the same thing as 5/3 multiplied by 3/5, which would be 15/15, or simply 1. So anytime you multiply a reciprocal by itself, you will always end up with a product of 1. In question 5, it says unscramble the letters to make a sentence. This is going to be order of operations, or bedmass. Order of operations, aka bedmass. Question 6 says diagram each of the following using either manipulatives or diagrams, or determine not to diagram. So it says 5 times 1/4. So if I was to draw a quarter and use my highlighter because it's pretty, and if I was to take said drawing and group it together and then infinite clone it, I don't know why it does that. It used to not do that. Now it does that. I would make 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 4 quarters. I would have 5 quarters if I took a quarter and multiplied it by 5. And 5 quarters is the same thing as saying 1 whole and a quarter, right? 5 quarters. In the second question, it says 4 times 2/3. So this time I'm going to draw 2/3. I'm going to take a different color highlighter because, of course, I have the ability to. I will take 2/3. I will then take this drawing and I will make 4 of them. So there's doubling it, there's tripling it, there's quadrupling it, or multiplying it by 4. So 4 groups of 2/3. How many thirds do I have in total? Altogether, I would have 8 thirds, which is equivalent to 2 2/3. And your third and final question says 2 times 5 halves. Well, 5 halves is a little tricky because we don't really think of how to draw 5 halves, but oops, if I was to draw it, and let's go with light blue this time. There's 2 halves, there's 4 halves, there's 5 halves. And if I was to take those 5 halves and double it, I could infinite clone it, and doubling it would give me 8, 9, 10 halves, which would be 10/2, which is equivalent to 5. Question 7, the average mass of a porcupine is about 12 kilograms. The average mass of a raccoon is about 3/4 of that, or the raccoon. What is the average mass of a raccoon? So 3/4 of the raccoon would become 3/4 times 12 kilograms, which would end up being, of course, if you had 3/4 and multiplied it by 12, how many quarters we had? You have 36 quarters, which is equal to 9, and therefore the raccoon weighs, or has a mass, excuse me, of 9 kgs. Question 8. Great strategy when you solve these types of questions is to actually diagram it. So it says the length of a rectangle is 6 centimeters, and its width is actually 2/3 of the length, or in brackets, 2/3 of 6 centimeters. So since that is a computable operation, I can simply take 2/3. Of is always multiplication, multiplied by 6/1. Cross reduce if you like that kind of stuff, and you're going to get the answer of, oh, I did something wrong here, 4. 4/1. And therefore, the width is 4 centimeters. Question 9. Okay. So it's using diagrams. So the first question, 3/4 divided by 2. I'm going to draw 3/4. I'm going to use the lovely pink this time because we haven't used pink for highlighter. So there's 3/4. And I'm going to divide that between two people. So 3/4 of a chocolate bar, 3/4 of a pizza divided between two people. This is myself and this is my wife's. How much do each of us get? Well, we end up getting what used to be divided into 4 pieces is now divided into 8. And I'm going to have 3 of those 8 pieces. So therefore, 3/4 divided between two people is 3/8 each. In the second question, we're going to take 2/3 instead of 1/3, 2/3. So you keep that pink. I kind of like that pink. There's 2/3 of a chocolate bar, a pizza, whatever, divided between 4 people. This is me, this is my wife, this is my daughter, and this is my son. How much does each get? Well, what used to be divided into 3 pieces is now divided into 12 pieces, of which each of us get 2/12 of it, or in lowest terms, 1/6. Question number 10 says a Polish recipe for making 6 servings of potato salad includes half an onion. And again, one of the greatest strategies you can use for this type of thing is to actually think of it in terms of a pitcher. So I'm going to actually make 6 servings of potato salad. There's 1 bowl, and through the magical world of infinite cloning, there's 2 bowls, there's 3 bowls, there's 4 bowls, 5 bowls, and 6 bowls of Polish potato salad. Now to make all 6 bowls, the recipe only calls for half an onion to make enough for 6 bowls. Therefore, each of those bowls is going to have a sixth of the half an onion. Or you can either think of a sixth of half an onion, or that half an onion divided into 6 bowls. Okay, both are correct solutions. You can think of it as being uh, a sixth of the half onions, or simply a half divided into 6. We're going to use division here. A half an onion divided into 6 bowls, which will become, when I multiply by the reciprocal, the multiplication. And therefore, each of these bowls of potato salad has a 1/12 of an onion in it. Okay, has a 1/12 of an onion. Question number 11 says, Regina has wet weather on about 3/10 of the days in a year. It has wet weather on about 4 times as many days as it does fog. So the number of days, if I'm thinking about this, so we're going to say rainy days and foggy days. This amount here is 4 times larger than this amount here. Okay? So another strategy you can use for solving these questions is to make simpler questions. So instead of saying 3/10 of the days of a year, if I ignore that and say that it's, let's say 40 days. So if this is 40 days, and this is 4 times as much as this, then we know that the number of fog days would have to be 10, right? Does that make sense? Or we would take the number of rainy days, and divide it by 4 to get the foggy days. Now, if I go back from that simpler question and then apply it to my actual question I was given, and it was 3/10 of a year, then the rainy days is 3/10 of a year divided by 4 will equal the foggy days. This is going to be 3/10 multiplied by the reciprocal of 4, which is a quarter, which will end up being 3/40. So therefore, um, 3/10 of a year is rain, and 3/40 of a year equals fog. Question number 12, explain diagrams. Of course, we know that of, right off the bat, we can change to multiplication. And this says half of 3/4. So if I take 3/4 and I do half of 3/4, then half of 3/4 is this much here, which is 3/8. If I take 3/4 of a half, well, there's a half. And 3/4 of that is 1, 2, 3. That is also 3/8. And if you explain why they have the same value, you have that. But another reason why you could say they have the same value is because what property of mathematics? The commutative property of mathematics says the order in which you add or multiply two numbers together does not affect its sum or its product. It does not work with division and subtraction, but it does work with multiplication and division, or and addition. Question 13, simply calculate. So multiplying is just multiply your integer, your numerators and denominators gives you 9/25, easy peasy. Here, in the second one, you can cross reduce. 4 over 12 reduced down to 1 over 3. 5 over 5 will 1 over 1. So your final answer will be 1/3. And finally over here, 4 over 8 will reduce down to 1 over 2. And your final answer will be 1/14. Now this is a class I'm sure a lot of the boys in my class would like to be in. 3/5 of a school class is made up of girls. The chance of you as a boy being able to find a date in that class is significant because there's not enough boys for all the girls, so you are a hot commodity if you are in that class. But I am going to employ the strategy of drawing it. So I'm going to make this into fifths. And not to be what's it, stereotypical, but I will make that 3/5 of the class be pink to symbolize girls, and of course could be whatever. But anyway, we have 3/5 of the class is girls. 1/3 of these girls walk to school. So I'm going to take this, and I'm not going to cut it up, because if that represents all of the girls in the school and 1/3 of that number walks, then this one here will be walkers. This one could be bus or car. 1/3 of them walk. And how much is this? 1/5 of the school would be walking to school. Question 15 says estimate and calculate. We don't need to estimate, just calculate. So here we're going to cross reduce. We're going to get 16 over 5, which is 3 1/5. When you multiply with mixed fractions, we know by now that you have to change them to improper. You get 49/12, which is 4 1/12 as a mixed fraction. And finally, 9 over 2 multiplied by 19 over 9. Oh, what a beautiful cross reduction this is, everybody. 9 over 9 is 1 over 1, which gives you 19 over 2, which is 9 1/2. Question number 16 says the driving distance from Winnipeg to Regina is 570 kilometers. So what I'm first going to do here is I'm going to simply draw a number line. I'm going to put W for Winnipeg and R for Regina and 570 kilometers for that line. The driving distance from Winnipeg to Calgary is 2 1/3 times longer. So I'm actually going to take that, double it, and then a little bit more. And that's going to be the distance from Winnipeg to Calgary. Now, since that distance is 2 1/3 times the driving distance from Winnipeg to Regina, I know that 2 1/3 times 570, based on my number line, will be the way I calculate the driving distance from Winnipeg to Calgary. Change the mixed fraction to improper. and multiply that out. Now I know that 570 is divisible by 3 because 5 plus 7 plus 0 is 12, and 12 is a multiple of 3. So for my divisibility rules in grade 7, if I take 570 and divide it by 3, divided by 3 is not, it's 190. So that would be 190 over 1. And then when I multiply 190 by 7, I get 1,330 kilometers. So therefore, the distance from Winnipeg to Calgary is 1,330 kilometers. Question 17 says calculate the number of hours in 3.5 days. So 1 day is 24 hours. So if I multiply that by 3.5, I will get the number of hours in 3.5 days. So 24 over 1 multiplied by 7 over 2, cross reduce. I end up with 12 times 7, which is 84, and therefore there are 84 hours in 3.5 days. Now, obviously, if this was a question you were asked in the real world, you wouldn't multiply it by 3.5, you'd multiply it by 3.5, and you'd still get 84, because 24 hours multiplied by 3.5 is 84. Question 18, the value of pi can be approximated with this fraction. So if I write down the formula, circumference equals pi times d. So if I write down the formula, and I know that this represents pi, and I know that this represents the diameter, I could simply substitute pi for this, d for this, and solve it using my fraction sense. Cross reduce to get 2 over 1. 22 times 2 is 44 over 1, which is 44. And therefore, the circumference, or this is the drawing of the whole thing here, the diameter is 14. The circumference of the circle, meaning the distance around the outside of the circle, would be 44 centimeters. Question 19, Chris calculated 2/3 divided by 3 and got an answer of 2. What mistake did Chris make? Well, Chris was kind of right. He knew that he was supposed to change that to multiplication, so he did that. He said, yeah, I'm going to change that. But instead of using the reciprocal of 3, he just kept it as 3, and he got up the answer of 2. What answer should he have gotten? He should have used the reciprocal of 3, which was a third, and got 2/9 instead. That would have been the correct answer. Poor Chris. Didn't do very well. Next 3 questions are just divide, so I'm going to not divide. I'm going to actually not choose the common denominator method, which we all despise. We're going to multiply by the reciprocal. Cross reduce when applicable. I get 4 over 5 as my final answer. 7 over 2 multiplied by the reciprocal of 2 1/4, which is, what's the reciprocal of 2 1/4? 4/9. We examined it as an improper fraction. I get 4/9. Cross reduce if applicable. I get 14/9, which is 1 5/9. And finally over here, 9 over 1 multiplied by the reciprocal of 9/10, which is 10/9. A beautiful cross reduction. Gives us the final answer of 10. Question 21 says, a horse eats a half a bale of hay per day. How long will 15 bales of hay last? Well, I asked my good friend Nash this question, and Nash was able to tell me it was the answer 30 right off the bat. He said 30, last 30 days. I said, well, how'd you do that? Well, he said it's 15 bales of hay, each one's a half. So 2 days would be 1 bale, so 15 bales would be 30 days. I said, well, how can we apply fraction operations to this? And the first thing he thought of was multiplication, or this one here. But then when he thought about it, he said, well, that's half of 15. That can't be right, because half of 15 is 7.5, so that can't be the right operation. And then he thought, well, what if I took those 15 bales of hay and divided them into smaller halves? And that would end up working, because he had 15 bales of hay divided into smaller lunches or smaller groups of a half. Multiplied by the reciprocal, you end up with a correct answer of 30 days. Now this one here about Marcia, this does not work with the operations that we're intending. This one here does not work in terms of division, which it's supposed to. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw the fence. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We have 9 parts to the fence, and 1/10 of that fence, which they are going to be painting a lovely aqua blue here, that took Marcia 3/4 of an hour to do. All right. So if it took her 3/4 of an hour to do that, we know that if we take that 3/4 of an hour and multiply it by 10, it will take her 7.5 hours to complete the fence. For 45 minutes for each slat, 7.5 hours in total to paint the entire fence. Question 23 says Vince usually takes 5.5 hours to drive from Kamloops to Banff. So from Kamloops to Banff, it's usually 5.5 hours. But because of snowfall, this Kamloops to Banff trip took 8.25 hours. How many times as long is this to drive? Now, a good example for this would be think of different numbers. Think of easier numbers. If it took 5 hours instead of 5.5 and it took 10, how many times longer did it take on a snowfall day in this example? How many times longer? If it took 5 hours the first way and 10 hours the second, it was twice as long, right? 2 times as many. So what did you do to the answer of the numbers of 5 and 10 to get the answer of 2? You used division. So therefore, if that works for your easier question, and you wrapped around the operations for that question with the easier, that will still work for this one. So take 8.25 divided by 5.5, and that will tell you the answer for how many times longer it was. So when using that, use your mixed fractions. This will be 11/2, multiplied by the reciprocal of 11/2, which is 2/11. Fortunately for us, it cross-reduces beautifully. 33/11 is 3/1. 2/4 is 1/2. And your answer is 3/2, which is 1.5. So how much longer did it take because of the snow? It was 1.5 times longer because of snowfall to drive from Kamloops to, where was it? Banff. Question 24, is this your last question or second last? 2 more? There's 3 more? Okay. So here we have bed mass questions. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do this multiplication and this multiplication, get 2 products, and then add them together because we're following order of operations. So 1/2 times 3/4 is 3/8, plus 3/2 times 1/3 is 3/6. Now your first common multiple that 8 and 6 share, because you have to find a common denominator. What is the first common multiple? 24. So we're going to use 24 as our common denominator. If you use 48, it ain't no thing. It's perfect. But we're going to get 9/24 and 12/24, which is 21/24, is that lowest terms. What's 2 plus 1? What's 2 plus 4? So both are divisible by 3, which will give you 7/8 as a final answer. Question B, I'm going to first do the brackets. So it's going to be 3/2 divided by 3/2 minus 2/3. Common denominator will be 6. 4, 9 will be 5/6 when you work it out. Keep your first fraction change to multiplication by the reciprocal. Cross reduce because you're multiplying. You get 9/5, which is 1 4/5.